For more than a century, the Antikythera mechanism taunted historians. Half a machine that survived and half lost to the sea. The rear gears whispered of eclipses in calendars, but the front was gone. Silenced for 2,000 years. Now that silence has been broken. This was a spectacular device. It's an analog computer. It doesn't use digital. It uses wheels and gears. This was a device that we wouldn't see again for another 2,000 years. Artificial intelligence restored the fractured inscriptions letter by letter, handing engineers the blueprint to rebuild what was missing. After they were able to finish their thousands of scans of the 82 pieces, something truly amazing emerges, and that is they find lighting. Piece by piece, the lost half returned, and what it calculates is enough to terrify historians. And they also use a computed X-ray tomography to get closer looks on the inside. What this will help them to do is to create a highly detailed 3D image of the mechanism for the very first time. What we found and the half that's gone. The spring of 1900 began like countless others on the Iron Sea. Calm waters broken by storms. Sailors waiting for windows to dive. But one crew wasn't after treasure or lost history. They were sponge divers from the island of Sime working under their captain Dimitrios Kondos. When bad weather forced them to anchor off a small rocky island called Antikythera between Crete and the Pelpine, they decided to make use of the time by diving. What unfolded changed archaeology forever. Kondos sent his diver Elias Stadiatis into the water dressed in the heavy canvas suit and copper helmet that were standard at the time. Stadiatis dropped to the seabed, settling at a depth of about 150 feet. What he saw made his blood run cold. Tangled shapes filled his view. Bodies twisted together in eerie silence. Terrified, he yanked his signal line and shot back to the surface. Convinced he had stumbled onto a mass grave. But these weren't corpses. They were statues. Bronze figures frozen mid-stride, toppled in the wreck of an ancient ship. When Kondos himself descended to sea, he surfaced with proof. A bronze arm green with centuries of corrosion. That single relic marked the beginning of the very first organized underwater excavation in Greek waters. Over the following year, the Greek navy joined the divers, recovering marble statues, fine glassware, coins, and countless broken artifacts. By 1901, crates of this astonishing cargo were being unpacked in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Among them sat an unimpressive lump of corroded bronze and rotted wood. Dismissed as nothing more than debris. It sat untouched until May 17, 1902, when museum scholar Valerio Stai spotted something extraordinary peeking through the crust, a bronze gear with teeth. That discovery opened the door to one of the greatest puzzles in archaeology, the Antikythera mechanism. The machine recovered from a ship that sank in the second quarter of the 1st century BC was older than the wreck itself. Scholars now date the mechanism to several decades earlier, making it more than 2,000 years old. Today, what survives is just 82 fragments, about a third of the original. Yet, even in ruin, those fragments preserve 30 interlocking bronze gears. The largest spans a little more than 5 and across, with hundreds of teeth carefully cut by hand. All the surviving pieces are now housed in the Athens Museum, displayed behind glass, still bearing scars of the sea. These fragments are our hard boundary. They are the bedrock of every theory because we must begin with what is physically there, bronze, teeth, and scratched inscriptions before we imagine what was lost. The largest surviving piece, Fragment A, holds most of the gearwork. Others preserve parts of circular scales and faint letters carved into the metal. In the 1970s, early X-ray studies hinted at the mechanism's complexity. But the real leap forward came in 2005 when a joint team from Britain and Greece brought cutting-edge imaging equipment into the museum. One machine was a 12-tonon computed tomography scanner nicknamed the Bladunner, built in the United Kingdom. It blasted high-energy X-rays through bronze from all angles, producing cross-sections that could be stacked into a three-dimensional view. The other was a reflectance imaging system from Hewlett-Packard, which allowed researchers to virtually relight the surface and pull out faint scratches invisible to the naked eye. Over the course of 2 weeks, the team revealed not only the hidden gears, but also thousands of text characters engraved on the plates. For the first time since the wreck, the machine itself spoke again through its own inscriptions. There was a twist. The highest magnification scans designed to capture details at a resolution of just a few thousandths of an inch were marred by glitches. In the 2005 session, roughly 25 of nearly 3,000 scan slices failed to record, and the fragment itself may have shifted slightly. The result was blur in stripes, exactly where researchers most needed clarity. But in 2018, a University College London team returned to the raw data. They painstakingly reprocessed it, filling the missing slices and correcting distortions. The reconstruction sharpened, new letters came into focus, and several contested readings gained certainty. This mattered deeply. A single Greek character on these plates could change the interpretation of a cycle or flip the meaning of a prediction. So, what do the readable portions actually show? Let's walk around the back first, because that side survives best. The upper dial is a spiral that winds 5 times around, marking off 235 lunar months. The 19-year Metonic cycle that kept Greek luna-solar calendars aligned with the seasons. Beside it is a sub-dial counting 76 years, the Calyptic cycle, which tightened the long-term accuracy. The lower half features another spiral with 223 lunar months, the Saros cycle, famous for predicting eclipses. Nested inside that is a smaller dial tracking the Exalgmos, a 54-year triple Saros that corrected the awkward remainder of 8 hours in each cycle, ensuring eclipse timing stayed precise. Another small dial marked out 4-year intervals for the Great Penellic Games. None of this is guesswork. These functions are inscribed in bronze. Zoom closer to the SOS spiral, and the machine becomes surprisingly practical. Each cell that might contain an eclipse carries a small glyph, a compact note in Greek. A letter signals whether it is lunar or solar, sigma for Selene, the moon, orta for Helios, the sun. A symbol resembling an anchor, actually a ligature of omega and rho means hour, followed by a letter number indicating the time. Phrases like of the day or of the night warn whether an eclipse would be visible from Greece. Beneath each glyph sits an index letter pointing to a block of explanatory text. Those texts describe details like the direction the shadow would come from, how much of the sun or moon would be covered, and even color cues that could be expected. Imagine a user turning the crank to a month, seeing the dial flag an eclipse and then reading off the type, the timing, and the fuller description. For a device from the 1st century BC, that is breathtaking. The inscriptions also reveal a cultural fingerprint. In 2008, a major study of the back text identified the full set of month names on the Metonic dial. They did not match the well-known Athenian calendar. Instead, they belonged to the Corinthian family of calendars used in Western Greece, particularly Apris and Corcyra. Scholars now believe the sequence best fits the Aparate calendar, possibly tied to the colony of Ambracia. Calendars are cultural markers. By engraving those month names, the maker effectively signed the device's civic identity. The front of the mechanism is far less complete. The gears and plates that once stood proud of the main frame are gone, leaving only fragments of the cover plates. Yet, those covers were inscribed, and their surviving lines are gold. In 2016, researchers published a critical edition of what they called the front cover inscription. These texts are not poetic riddles. They are lists of exact planetary relations for each of the 5 known planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The inscription spells out how many synodic cycles or phase returns with respect to the Sun equal whole numbers of years and full revolutions through the zodiac. In plain terms, the cover lays down the integer ratios that the missing gear trains had to reproduce. When it says that after a given number of years, a planet completes a precise number of synodic cycles and zodiacal revolutions, that is not a hint. It is a requirement. Any reconstruction of the front must satisfy those ratios. This is what makes the missing half such a challenge. We are not free to imagine any design of the sky we like. The surviving gears show what techniques the builders used. The inscriptions dictate which mathematical periods had to appear, and the physical space available in front of the frame sets hard limits on how many wheels and tubes could fit without clashing. A viable reconstruction has to satisfy all 3 constraints at once: mechanical, mathematical, and spatial. And that's where the real challenge begins. Rebuilding the lost front and proving it could actually work. How we rebuilt the missing front. The missing front half of the Antikythera mechanism wasn't pieced together by guesswork, but by careful engineering. Step by step, researchers took the hard facts already nailed down: gear counts, tooth sizes, surviving inscriptions, and the literal bronze framework, and used them as inputs to build the half that no longer exists. And before the gears could be rebuilt, artificial intelligence gave scholars a head start. A model called Ithaca, created by DeepMind, helps restore broken Greek inscriptions. On its own, it predicts missing letters with about 62% accuracy. But when used alongside human historians, it raises their accuracy from about 25 to more than 70%. This matters because the numbers carved on the cover plates are the very targets the front has to hit. Cleaner, more confident readings narrowed the design options, shrinking guesswork and tightening the path forward. The first person who truly proved the front could be more than a thought experiment was Michael T. Wright in the early 2000s. Wright, then a curator at the Science Museum in London, hand-built working models. He introduced epicyclic gearing, small gears mounted on arms that orbit around larger gears to capture the non-uniform motion of planets. He also used the pin and slot device, a clever setup where a pin moving inside a slot forces the follower gear to speed up and slow down smoothly. Ancient Greek astronomers expected such irregular motion because planets appear to change speed in the sky. Wright even built a full planetarium model long before the cover inscriptions were fully deciphered. Was his layout perfect? Number. But he demonstrated in solid brass that the front could indeed carry planetary motions using techniques that fit the ancient Greek toolkit. His builds moved the debate from maybe to yes, we can do this. Later teams stood firmly on that foundation. The decisive leap came in 2021 when a University College London team unveiled what they called their model of the cosmos. This wasn't a pretty drawing or a computer animation. It was a full front-side architecture that had to obey hard rules. It had to fit inside the physical clearances left in the surviving frame. It had to reproduce the exact integer period relations carved into the inscriptions, and it had to allow shafts and tubes to pass through the middle without colliding. At the heart of this design sits a small dome for Earth and the system for the Moon. Around that core, the planetary gear trains are wrapped so that their outputs feed into a bundle of thin nested tubes at the center. The researchers called this bundle the Central Coaxial Output or CCO, and it is the backbone of the whole system. It lets multiple displays share the same hub without crashing into each other. The face of the mechanism in this reconstruction is arranged as concentric rings rather than a crowd of overlapping pointers. That may sound cosmetic, but it is actually crucial. Rings reduce parallax problems. The difficulty of reading multiple hands layered on top of each other, and they match what the surviving user manual text says about a cosmos arranged in rings. One of the smartest packaging moves was the relocation of the initial drive gears for the true Sun and the three outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Earlier reconstructions placed those starter gears behind the large circular plate, which the 2021 paper calls the CP. That decision always created a nightmare. To reach around, you needed awkward brackets that added bulk and were unlikely for ancient builders. The UCL team solved it by moving those gears to the front. That single shift opened up space, eliminated the bracket problem, and gave each planetary train a clean path to the central output. At dead center sits a fixed gear labeled 56 in the paper, and compact epicyclic sets right on that fixed anchor. You only find a move like that after weeks of virtual layouts that crash into themselves until one gap appears and everything suddenly fits. Part of what makes this layout elegant is gear sharing. Instead of designing each planet from scratch, the UCL team let several trains borrow key wheels. The true Sun shares a gear labeled 52 with Saturn and uses the same fixed gear 56 that anchors all three superior planets. Mars and Jupiter share another gear labeled 64. That kind of economy is essential when the space you have is measured in tenth of an inch. Every extra arbor adds thickness and every new wheel risks a clash. By sharing gears, the model stays thin and tight. The rebuild also had to respect a physical skeleton preserved in one large surviving fragment. The main drive wheel with 4 spokes and sets of pillars around its rim. Those pillars once supported 2 plates, a rectangular strap mounted on short pillars and the circular CP mounted on longer ones. The UCL design uses that frame as a sandwich. Between the big wheel and the strap, they packed 9 closely stacked layers of gearing into a space of about 0.59 inches. That cramped zone houses the mean sun drive, the lunar node mechanism, and the base of the inner planet trains. Between the strap and the CP, they squeezed most of the gear work for the sun and the outer planets into a gap of just 9.7 millimeters, about 0.38 inches. The fact that the strap sits at an 11 degrees tilt relative to the spokes is not an error, it's a blessing. That angle gives Mercury and Venus just enough clearance for their epicyclic parts to slip past their neighbors. This is watchmaker-level packing measured in fractions of an inch. One of the most satisfying detective moments in the rebuild comes from a small block on spoke D that has a mysterious hole through it. For years, no one could explain its purpose. The 2021 architecture solved it. The small black and white moon sphere on the front needs input from both the sun and the moon to show the correct phase. But if the front face is built as rings, you don't want to duplicate the sun calculation just to drive the moon. The UCL design routes a mean sun feed through a bar attached to that pierced block on spoke D, the shortest bridge across the fixed central gears to reach the lunar phase device. Suddenly, the block isn't a puzzle anymore. It's a bracket with a clear job. The Venus mechanism provides another aha moment. A small fragment called fragment D preserves a disc riveted to a gear with a shaft that changes shape from square to round as it passes through a plate. The gear has 63 teeth with all but 3 still intact, so the count is secure. In the UCL model, that disc carries the offset pin needed for a pin and slot follower to create Venus's irregular motion. The plate becomes the bearing surface at exactly the right height. The fit is so precise that the authors argue fragment D's parts are the epicyclic core of the Venus train. Whether or not you care about Venus's role on the dial, the point is clear. The surviving bronze fragments sit where the mechanics require them. A similar breakthrough occurs on spoke B, which carries a prominent bearing with no obvious purpose in older reconstructions. In the 2021 design, that bearing supports a compact Ford gear epic set for the lunar nodes, the shifting line that marks where the moon's orbit crosses the sun's path. The bearing aligns perfectly with the tooth sizes in the model, and the space is exactly where the node's train needs to be. There is also a simple honesty in the gear count. Behind the rear plate, the surviving systems already account for 35 gears. The 2021 model adds 34 new gears in front to run the Cosmos. Together, that makes 69 gears. That number is tight enough to fit within the surviving bronze frame and specific enough that you can list each gear's tooth count and location. Under the hood, the designers kept each planetary train as lean as the math would allow. The true Sun uses just 3 gears. Each superior planet, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, runs on a compact 7-gear epicyclic set. The inner planets, Mercury, and Venus, use 5-gear trains with pin and slot followers for their characteristic stop-and-go motion where the central world needs an extra feed, but the hub is blocked by fixed gears. The team uses a pierced block and a crossbar to hop over. As with the mean sun bar on spoke D. These are the small, stubborn fixes real mechanisms demand. What makes this 2021 rebuild credible is that it can be tested. In 2025, another research team tested the reconstruction with computer simulations. They used triangular tooth shapes, the sharp-edge style you often see in modern replicas, and then added small manufacturing errors to see what would happen. The results were a warning. The tooth shape by itself wasn't a big problem. But if the spacing between gears was off by even the small amounts sometimes suggested, the system could jam after long use. That doesn't mean the 2021 model is wrong. It just raises tougher questions. What kind of gear teeth did the Greeks actually cut? How precise were their measurements? How smooth was their bronze? The key point is that this isn't a legend anymore. We're now dealing with practical engineering issues like friction, spacing, and wear. Problems you can measure and test. Now that the rebuild works on paper and in simulation, we can finally ask the bigger question. What did the Greeks actually see on the face when this machine came alive? How the Greeks saw the heavens. The very first thing you'd see is the center, a tiny dome representing Earth. Wrapped around it, a pointer shows the moon's position as it moves through the zodiac signs. Beside that pointer sits a marble-sized ball, half painted black and half painted white. Day by day, this little ball turns to show the moon's phases. When it's fully dark, it's a new moon. When it's fully bright, it's a full moon. Every shade in between plays out on that sphere. But the moon is only the beginning. Around it, 6 slim rings are stacked one after the other, each carrying one of the moving bodies the Greeks followed: Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Outside all of them sits the wide zodiac circle divided into 12 signs and beyond that a ring showing the calendar days of the year. Each planet is marked by a bead fixed to its ring. The Sun gets a golden bead with its own pointer, just as an ancient inscription describes a cosmos arranged in rings with little spheres. On the very edge, a skinny date ring tells you the day. If you want to know today's date, you read that. If you want to see where the planets are in the heavens, you watch the beads. None of this is a guess. Inscriptions discovered in 2016 describe the front in exactly these terms, and the 2021 reconstruction followed those words